For those of you who don't know me, let me introduce myself. My name is Jonathan. I am the family pastor on staff here. Some of you guys know who I am, and that's probably because you're moms and dads, so you see me back in the kids area. Those of you who are like, why is he not on the screen? That's because you don't see me in the kids area, but I am the family pastor on staff. Also, some of you just know me as that guy who won't stop asking them to serve in the kids area. And for those people, I would say, what do you think this sermon is going to be about? So, it's not a coincidence that we timed this with your place in the body. But like I said, I'm the family life pastor on staff. And with that, my job deals with a whole lot of stuff. I do all kinds of different things. I'm doing videos, or whether it's editing photos, or whether it's doing kids' church. But one of my favorite aspects of my job is that I get to be involved in the community. And I get to be involved in the community in all kinds of ways. Some of these are ways that you guys know, like with Sunshine Patrol. I serve under Kelly for Sunshine Patrol every single morning at Regina Howe. We open car doors for parents. And for those of you, if you do Sunshine Patrol, go ahead and raise your hand. Go ahead. Yeah, see, we've got a few over here. These guys don't realize it, but that 30 minutes every single morning is having such a huge impact on the parents at Regina Howe. I ran all the time. I'm in stores, and people walk in and be like, hey, are you that morning guy? I'm like, yes. And they're like, you yell at my kids every day, and I get to talk to them. I'm in parent groups for Regina, and they notice us, and they love us. Like, they miss us. It's a big deal. They're making a big impact because they're involved in the community, and that's just one of the things that I get to do. Actually, a lot of the time throughout the month, I'm involved in several things throughout the community, whether that's we meet with a group of pastors who their whole goal is to go in and we do conflict resolution in the schools. They bring kids together and we talk about, hey, when somebody makes you mad, how do you handle that? How do we deal with that? I'm with a group of people that their whole passion is we want to get second graders and teach them how to read. And so they give up their time and they go into the schools and they read with these second graders every single week. They give up their valuable time. I'm learning how to read through this program, so it's very exciting. But I see all this stuff. I'm involved in several groups. We have groups it's just all of the counselors in BISD, and they get around, they discuss. And about a year ago, I was going to all these meetings, and I started to realize that all of these meetings seem to have the same general theme. They're all discussing the same thing. They're all asking the same question. That question is, how do we fix Beaumont? I don't think there's any doubt in this room that Beaumont has some problems. We've got issues. Every city has issues, but Beaumont seems to be in a rough state right now, and it's been in a rough state for a while. In fact, I remember in 2016 when I got hired, my wife and I accepted the job offer, and then we're like, well, let's move to Beaumont. And somebody goes, do you know what Beaumont's known for? I was like, no. So I just did a quick Google search, and I realized that where we were moving was very different than when we were moving from. You see, Beaumont, at the time in 2016, I remember researching, and they were number 3 in the state of Texas for murder per capita. To put that in perspective, we beat both Houston and Dallas. I've been to Houston. I don't know how we beat them, but we did it, right? Not only that, but I was doing some research, and did you know that if you live in Beaumont, the likelihood that you'll be a victim of a violent crime is 1 in 17. There's a lot of people in Beaumont, 17 is a small number. But that's just the case that we're in. Beaumont is in a rough position, and we all know that we've had some issues with our school system. We've had issues with all this stuff, and so now we've got these groups of people who are out there trying to figure out how do we fix Beaumont. And every single one of these things they're doing is great. They really are. I love going in and doing key communicators, conflict resolution. I love the passion that these ministers, these churches have gotten together and said, it doesn't matter where we go, it doesn't matter what color they are, we want to help fix Beaumont. I love the fact that all the counselors in BISD are willing to come to a church and learn how to partner with churches because they realize that something's wrong and we need to fix Beaumont. But yet, for some reason, all these groups, they get it. They're out there, they're doing something, but Beaumont still seems to be the same. Something's missing. With that topic, the last few months I've been reading through the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah is one of my favorite books in the Bible. In fact, I've said for years that Nehemiah should be a movie because it's just like, you see this story. In fact, I imagine the movie is always black, and then you just hear the words, I was cupbearer to the king. And it's like, the big, wah, that's the thing we do right now. And all of a sudden you see this story of this man who goes back to his hometown and rebuilds his city in 52 days with nothing but a hammer in one hand and a sword in the other. Amen. That's a legit story. Like that is, I don't know why people don't read the Bible. Those are great stories. But I've been reading Nehemiah, and lately I've been reading Nehemiah differently. And it all actually started, we went to this conference for a kids conference, and they talked about Nehemiah in this aspect. And I was like, man, the church needs to hear this message because it's amazing. And so I've been reading through Nehemiah over and over and over in preparation for this. I went to Pastor and said, Pastor, I feel like God has given me something to tell our church. And he's like, well, then you can go ahead and speak it. And then I got nervous because I was hoping he would give it. He would give it to the church. But the reality of it is that when you read Nehemiah through this aspect, it's great because Nehemiah is a story that says that we can do more together, right? Nehemiah comes and he rallies this group to rebuild their city in 52 days. But what Nehemiah really does, and this is the cool aspect, is it's not just a story that we can do more together, but it's a story that says that when we work together, it has the potential to affect how a generation sees God. And this was, just imagine being a 13-year-old in Jerusalem at the time. Jerusalem, for those of you who haven't read through the story of Nehemiah, first off, you need to go and read it after this. I'm gonna skim it. We're gonna move quick, but it is such a good story. In fact, there is hundreds of messages in Nehemiah, and we don't have time for all of them, but in the book of Nehemiah, Jerusalem has been run down by cities over and over and over. It's like the waves crashing on the bank. People are just tearing down Jerusalem, and every time they start to get their feet under them, people would come in and tear them down again, and it's gotten to this point where for generations, Jerusalem has been in ruins. Their walls are torn down. They have no defense. They don't want to rebuild their walls because the second they do, an army comes in and kicks them back over, and beats them up. And so they're just living in ruin, and they have been for a long time. And if you look at Jerusalem, obviously one of two things was true. Either number one, they'd been living in this rubble and this ruin for so long that they just didn't see it anymore. Or number two, they just couldn't imagine a way that it could get any better. They're like, I'm a jeweler. How am I supposed to rebuild these walls? I'm a priest. How am I supposed to rebuild these walls? And they had just accepted the fact that nothing was gonna get any better. This is just how the city was. And imagine being a 13-year-old walking around that city, because these are God's people, so you know that they had Sunday school. In fact, they did Sunday school every single day. And imagine this 13-year-old walking around to Sunday school every single day, and you hear these great stories of when Moses threw down his staff and split open the ocean and the Israelites walked through on dry land, or you hear all these amazing stories of victory. But then you look around and you're like, if this God that everybody's talking about is so awesome, if this God did all these amazing things through these people, why is this what the city looks like? Why can't we do something here? And you start to think that maybe this whole God thing is just a thing to make old people feel good, You start to get these 13-year-olds that are saying, no, Dad, I'm not gonna go to class today. I think I'm just gonna go and do my own thing. No, Dad, we're not going to church on Sunday. I wanna stay home with my friends. I have more fun here. Or Dad, we're not doing the sacrifice anymore. This year I'm keeping my sheep. I'm tired of killing off my pets. You have these 13-year-olds who are just done, and they're starting to think that maybe this whole God thing just isn't reality. It's just stories, stories that we hear every week. And guys, I would be lying to you if I said that we weren't on the precipice of a generation in the same state. We are on the precipice of a generation that just sees God as a bunch of Bible stories. And they're great stories. They're awesome stories. The story we're talking about right now is awesome, but there's a generation right now that is listening to this story and going, great story. We'll see you next week. We're on the verge of this. But the reality of it is that I believe it can be fixed. If it can be fixed then, it can be fixed now. And when you read through Nehemiah, you can see several points where Nehemiah, we can pull out some lessons. 3 lessons in particular, because it's a sermon, so you're supposed to have 3 points. But 3 lessons in particular where Nehemiah rebuilds the city. And in fact, we're gonna start with number 1. The first lesson that you find in Nehemiah is that we need to name what's broken. We need to name what's broken. You see, in Nehemiah, the story of Nehemiah starts. Nehemiah is a cupbearer to the king. That means he stands next to the king with his wine. And basically, he tries it before the king does, so that if it's poison, he dies and not the king. He's doing this. He doesn't live in Jerusalem. And one of his buddies comes and finds Nehemiah and says, Nehemiah, you'll never guess what's going on at home, right? He gets some news about his hometown. And if you look at Nehemiah 1:3, we'll throw it up here. Basically, what he says is, he goes to Nehemiah and says, those who survived exile are back in the province, are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem has been broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. What he's saying is, your hometown is a mess. Your hometown's in ruin, And immediately, Nehemiah does a few things. Number 1, he grieves, because when you find out the place that you call home is in ruin, you grieve. Number 2, he prays. But then immediately, the first thing he does, it's within like 1 or 2 days, is he goes and he sees the problem for himself. That is what the church needs to do, because the reality of it is if you can't name the problem, you can't fix the problem. So often the church sits here and we hear about the problems and we mourn and we pray, but we miss the third step. Nehemiah went to where it was, he saw the problem with his own eyes, and then he figured out how to fix it. The church has to be relevant in their community. If the church is not relevant in its community, it loses its right and its authority over its community. It loses its influence with its community. And so Nehemiah goes and he addresses the problem and he fixes it. And here's a big one. Nehemiah didn't ignore the problem, and this one is a touchy sentence to say, but also is Nehemiah didn't wait around for a miracle. Now, was a miracle needed? Yes. Without a doubt, you cannot rebuild a city in 52 days without a miracle. But Nehemiah didn't wait around for the miracle. In fact, you see in his prayer, he begins to pray for God, and the first thing he does is he apologizes to God for his people's attitudes. Number 2 is he reminds God who he is to the Israelites. He says, you're our God, and you promised to take care of us, and I'm reminding you of that. And then number 3, you can tell as he's praying, it almost has this like anxiety in it, because all of a sudden he's saying, and God, I really hope you bless what I'm doing, because here I go. And like he's walking out the door and he gets to Jerusalem and he names the problem. He sees it for himself. The second lesson that we learn from Nehemiah is that you have to do something you don't know how to do. That's where I love the line from Nehemiah, the one that I think should start off its movie. And it's right here. It says, I was cupbearer to the king. This is why I love this line. This line right here, though it is saying, this is what I am, it's saying a whole lot more about who he's not than who he is, right? He was cupbearer. All he did was hold a cup and then drink it and a monkey can do that. You know what I mean? Raccoons can do that. They got thumbs, they can hold a cup. They'll put their hands in it, but they can hold it. And so that's what he's saying. What he's really saying there is not, I was cupbearer of the king. What he's saying there is, I wasn't a pastor. I wasn't a contract. What builds walls? What's that job? Contractor. I wasn't a contractor. I didn't know how to build walls, right? I wasn't a community organizer. I didn't know how to rally a group of people. I was just a dude that held a cup, but God called me to do this anyway. We see this. He's sitting there and he's underqualified, and somebody comes in and goes, your hometown is in trouble. And he goes, well, then let's fix it. Let's do it. Let's go. And he didn't wait around for a miracle. He became the miracle. He went and he fixed the problem. And so we see this, this is what it was. And this is actually Christian Fellowship's and Venture Kids' goal for the kingdom also. You see, the reality of it is if we want to fix Beaumont, kids need to know how to read, and that's good. Kids need to know conflict resolution, and that's good. Those are worthy goals. Those are people who are already trying to fix a problem. But unless the church steps in and does their role, we're not going to fix it. You see, the way that we're going to fix Beaumont is this. We're going to give every kid an adult who can show them who Jesus is. That's it. I know you're thinking like, yeah, PJ, that's a lot of kids in Beaumont. There's like 300 of us, 400 of us in the room. But the reality of it is if we can start somewhere, we can start with one adult and a group of 5 kids. We can start there. We can start anywhere. In fact, I get to hear this all the time in my job. Every single Sunday, I get to come in and I get to hear people say, I'm a lawyer, but I also get to work with a group of 6th graders. I'm a teacher, but also I get to work in the nursery every single Sunday morning, right? I'm a contractor, but also I lead a group of 7th grade girls and their drama every single week. These are people that get it, and God bless those people. But these are people that get it, They're present in the lives of kids because they understand that if we don't do something, the future of a generation is at risk. They understand that there is a generation sitting on the sidelines watching right now, wondering when the generation above them is going to be willing to get close enough and deal with the muck. When the generation above them is going to be willing to step in and do what the generation is supposed to do. They're supposed to lead them, they're supposed to guide them. They just want to know that we care enough about God and we care enough about them to step in and hold our hands against the wound. You have to forgive me, I've been working on this for months and I haven't made it through without crying yet. This is important to me, guys. I care so much about the next generation. And it hurts me to see that they're gonna die and go to hell because we won't step in and do something for them. Sorry. Woo. Oh. Sorry about that. Like I said, I've been trying to get through this sermon for over a month, and I haven't made it through without crying yet. But now that we got that out of the way, you see, the first thing Nehemiah does, his rallying speech was not a long one. In fact, it was shorter than what I'm doing right now. He just goes to Jerusalem, he sees the problem, and then he gets in front of a group of people who don't know what they're doing, and he names it. In Nehemiah 2:17, this is what he says. You see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall, and we will no longer be in disgrace. And then they get to work. They fix it. They don't sit around and wait for God to send a construction crew. They don't sit around and wait for the enemy to be like, well, we'll give you back all your material. No, they just get to work with what they have. And then after this, you see this long list of people. It'd be like, this guy who was the jeweler in town and his two sons rebuilt the gate in front of their house. This guy was this guy raised cattle and he built a wall in front of his house. You even see at one point, and I love this, I believe they put this in on purpose. You see a man that says, this man didn't have any sons, but he and his 4 daughters rebuilt the gate in front of their house. These are people who don't know what they're doing, but they know that they have to do it anyway. And they step in. And finally, this is the last one, and this is a group that we can't leave out, but this group comes in, and this group is probably one of the more important ones, but without the support of their community, this group also can't succeed. Because you see, later on in the story of Nehemiah, we see that they begin rebuilding the wall, and when you begin to work towards a goal, everybody knows that the enemy doesn't want that to happen. And so the enemy begins to see that this is happening, and they start spreading rumors that they're going to attack. They're trying to discourage them. They're saying, hey, we're coming for you. If you keep building, we're going to kill you. And they keep coming. And so all the people in Jerusalem begin hearing that the enemy is about to attack, and they start getting scared, and they start getting discouraged because it's a big job, and now they have to build this, but also defend against an army. They're not trained for that, and they start to get discouraged. And when this happens, Nehemiah does our third lesson that I love. Nehemiah made the parents the champion. This is a big one. Right? We see this. In fact, you can see in Nehemiah 4:13, this is what the verse says. As soon as the enemy was about to attack, he goes, therefore I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points in the walls, exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And after I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, for your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. This is a big deal right here because Nehemiah understood something very important. We couldn't have gotten here unless the community had rallied and began working, unless the church had rallied and began working. But then once the enemy attacked, he realized that mom and dad fight different. They just do, right? You name one person that is brave enough to go up against a mom who you feel you have wronged her kids. Mom and dad fight different. They just do. And Nehemiah understood this. He understood that if mom and dad would go and stand in the gap and they would turn around and they would see their son and their daughter, that there is nothing that they would not stop fighting for. They would rebuild the wall. And so Nehemiah places families in the gaps. As the rest of the city is building the wall, he places families in the gaps and says, fight for your families. Stand in the gaps for your families. And this is a really big deal because I like to imagine this moment right here probably changed a generation forever. Instead of walking around going, how great is God? Eventually these kids grow up and they have kids and they're like, you should have seen grandma. You should have seen grandma when we were about to fight. When we were about to fight, she stood in the gap for me and for you. She stood in the gap for what God has called us to do. Right? And here's the crazy part of it is when mom and dad stood up and stood in the gap for their kids, when mom and dad got involved in the process, the enemy decided not to attack. Because the enemy understands mom and dad fight different too. This is not a long sermon. In fact, we're wrapping it up right now. But the reality of it is that you can look at when the walls were rebuilt, this is what happened. We have the proof that this works. Is when the walls were rebuilt, number one, those outside the walls, the skeptics, the enemy, changed what they believed about God. All of a sudden, they understood that this God was the real deal. This God was powerful, and we see in the verses that the enemy changes how they view about God. Number two is those inside the wall changed how they listened to God. In fact, it says in Nehemiah that after the walls were rebuilt, The priest comes out, opens up his Bible, and begins to read the scriptures from daybreak until noon, which that's a long sermon. But he goes to read that, and the Bible says that everyone listened intently to a dude reading out of a book. You know, like they understood the gravity of what the words in those books were. They understood that the God in that book was alive and he was present. And finally, once the walls were rebuilt, a generation changed how they worshiped God. Right? We see this generation grow up and they are committed and they are worshiping God as well. That's a big deal.